Well, howdy there, stranger. I'm Jordy.
And I'm Brad.
And welcome back to Beers with Queers, the true crime podcast where I research a case and Brad here, and potentially you guys.
Don't know a damn thing about it.
Well, it is a very, very sad day here at the Beers with Queers podcast. It is the final week of Pride Month. Where the hell has the month gone?
It went so fast.
It has went so fast. It is hard to believe. I keep seeing the date, and honestly, it still doesn't feel real. And it's so crazy how fast time moves. And I guess it's just the older you get. And I mean, I'm starting to get up there, so I'm like starting to see how fast it really goes. And yeah, it does not slow down.
Especially since we didn't slow down either all Pride Month. I mean, it started out at Trixie Mattel's Pink Disco, and then we went to Winston-Salem, and then we just had our South Knox Pride. So, I mean, we were busy during all that time also putting together 6 episodes for this month alone, which I did not realize was going to be as hard as it is.
And on top of all that, we're getting ready for Nashville Pride this coming weekend. And one of the things that we actually thought of pretty last minute last weekend when we were in Winston-Salem was at Winston-Salem Pride, they were giving out bricks painted with the Pride and trans flag colors. And I was like, that's such a good idea. Maybe I don't want to give out whole bricks, but maybe we can think of something to give out. And then we all came up with the good idea of like 3D printing these little mini brick keychains and then painting them the different Pride colors and
hand painting them, by the way.
Hand painting them. And I spent this week, I designed a little brick in Blender. I 3D printed it. And it turned out pretty good, if I do say so myself. I really like it. I'm going to make myself one. I'm making all our friends one. And we're just going to be giving those out at Nashville Pride this weekend. However, there's supposed to be like 100,000 people. I can't print that many, but I'm going to try and print as many as I can. I think I printed a little over 100. And if my calculations are correct, I can print roughly maybe 400-ish. But all those are also going to be hand painted to give out and also put on keychains. Like I'm making the whole keychain. So that has been a process. That's been really busy, really fun though. Actually, I love being creative, especially when it's like, different, cool, creative things for the podcast. But yeah, that's going to be exciting. I'm excited to...
We also got a big batch of stickers to give out for those that love to run around with their water bottles like all of our friends do.
Like a lot of queer people. Most of our friends are queer, so it makes sense. I actually said it yesterday. They have their water bottles and they have their backpacks with all their little keychains hanging off of it. So every time they walk, it jingles. And I say that as someone who also has a backpack like that. But it has been a great Pride. Sono Pride was really cool. We got to see a bunch of people. We got to meet a bunch of people. We got to meet some listeners, which was always really fun. And it's just been a really fun Pride Month. We've gotten to experience so many cool Pride things. And the whole month was full of love and acceptance. And hopefully it was the same for you guys. Despite all of the horror happening in the news currently, it's been a decent Pride Month here. I've really felt the love, despite everything. People have really shown out,
I'll say
supportive.
There's been a lot more people out this year at a lot of the ones that we went to than in recent years. So I think it's kind of one of those things where people are like, hey, we need to get out there and be seen, which is very important right now.
It's very important, and so it really warms my heart. It's really good. It really restores your faith in humanity. It's really fun time all around. And now by the time this episode comes out, we still have one more big event to go to close out Pride, and that is, of course, walking in the Nashville Pride Parade this coming Saturday. So it's going to be huge. I think they were saying this year is expected to be their biggest year yet, with over 100,000 people in attendance, which both makes me excited and nervous because that's a lot of people, and I am an anxious person. But it's going to be fun. I definitely know it's going to be fun. And we'll definitely let you guys know next week how it all turns out and how awesome it was. Hopefully, I don't get sunburned again. I got really sunburnt at Winston. I slathered on sunscreen this at Sono Pride, and I still got sunburnt. But also, to be fair, it was 95 degrees out. So,
Plus, he was still a little bit sunburnt from Winston because when we're like, hey, has everybody got sunscreen on? Jordy's like, yeah, and he does not.
it depends. Sometimes I put it on, sometimes I don't. Normally, I don't burn this bad, but
When it is 90 something degrees and you're going to be in the heat for hours, you put on sunscreen. That's for everybody out there. Put on sunscreen.
yeah, put on sunscreen. It definitely helps in the future, and I'll start being better at it. It's just one of those things where I don't like the feeling of sunscreen. It really takes me out of the mood. But
You know what I hate more than the feeling of sunscreen? The feeling of going to sleep with a sunburn.
yeah, that's fair. So hopefully we see some of you guys there. If you see us, come up to us, stop us, say hi. We'll be walking around the festival all weekend long. So really hope to run into some of you guys and give you a nice little Pride Brick keychain. But now, while Pride Month is sadly coming to an end, of course, Pride never ends on this podcast. We celebrate Pride all year round, 24/7. But with everything going on currently, I didn't want to close out the month with something too depressing, honestly. Although this podcast is about bringing awareness to the injustice queer people experience in the world, we also celebrate the triumphs and the highs of the community as well. So I thought it would be a great way to close out Pride with just a little queer history episode, something not too dark, something a little bit more lighthearted, and something honestly that isn't talked about anymore, but for a while was a huge part of how queer people were treated in American society. However, before we do get into today's episode, we do have to get serious for a moment. So I actually didn't know this, and one of our listeners actually reached out to me and not only pointed it out and informed me of it, but also asked if we could inform you guys, and I happily obliged. So just last week, the community received some crushing news when the current administration announced that it was officially cutting funding and ordering the closure of the 988 Suicide Helpline LGBT plus Youth Specialized Service Program, effective July 17th, 2025.
During Pride Month.
During Pride Month. I have a feeling that was very intentional. But now what this was, it was a branch of the hotline. So if you called in, you could text Pride or say Pride, and it would transfer you to someone who was a part of the community or worked closely with the community. And if you were having a crisis, they would be better equipped to deal with what you were going through. Someone who actually knows what your experience, can talk about it, you can relate to them. And so it was a very important branch of the hotline. And this program helped more than 1.3 million queer youth, as stated by President of the Trevor Project, James Beck, who stated, quote, "This is devastating, to say the least. Suicide prevention is about people, not politics. The administration's decision to remove a bipartisan, evidence-based service that has effectively supported a high-risk group of young people through their darkest moments is incomprehensible. The fact that this news comes to us halfway through Pride Month is callous, as is the administration's choice to remove the T from the acronym LGBTQ+ in their announcement. Transgender people can never and will never be erased. Congress can still act to reverse this fatal decision. We are asking everyone to join the overwhelming public support for evidence-based crisis services and urge Congress to act. Learn more by visiting thetrevorproject.org/actnow. Now, of course, this is obviously horrible news, but also at the same time, I did want to take a moment to let you know that it will be okay. And if you are in crisis or know of someone who needs assistance, the Trevor Project's trained crisis counselors are available 24/7 at 1-866-488-7386 via chat at thetrevorproject.org/get-help or by texting START to 678-678. So it is scary horrible when they announce that they're cutting that, but at the same time, there are still resources out there. If you are having a crisis, know someone who is, or just need to talk to someone, you can reach the Trevor Project at any of those numbers.
Did you know that queer youth are 2 times more likely to kill themselves? And they're 8 times more likely to kill themselves if the family rejects them.
Mm-hmm. And so that's just even more horrible. Is like their family rejects them, and then you offer this one service like that could connect them with someone that could help talk them and understand them on a personal level, and then you're just literally just being like, we're cutting it.
And you know what? If you're one of those parents out there that is the worst thing anybody can tell me about my child is they're gay, you need to rethink your priorities. Because the worst thing you can hear about your kid is that they're dead.
Yeah, and that's the truth. Is like so many people are like, that's the worst thing they could be, is that they're gay or they're trans. And it's like, that's really weird, because if I had a kid, the worst thing someone could say about my kid was that they died. It's so weird the way some people think. Like, you would rather your kid be dead than be gay. That's a horrible parenting. You shouldn't be parents. But with that, still, don't let that discourage you. Don't let that get you down. We're here. Even if you want to reach out and need to talk, you can always shoot us a message on our socials. And if we can't help, we will find the resources to help. So we are also a resource for you all year round. Now, with that, I know it's really sad and really rough, but let's get into today's episode.
Yep, you got me already worked up.
Well, the rest of the episode's not going to be bad. It's nothing sad. There's no murder or anything like that. It was really just a little history. But I did have to put that in, especially because someone did reach out and was like, hey, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but I was wondering if you could like provide resources and stuff. And I was like, absolutely. I didn't know this was happening, so I don't know who else doesn't know. And so, yeah, thank you to that listener so much for pointing it and bringing it to our attention. And hopefully you guys are also now aware and can help make a difference too.
And pass that knowledge along.
Yeah, and just pass it along. Okay, so today we're taking a little trip back through time to a period that I have a strong passion for, a passion rivaled only by my passion for true crime reporting and horror movies, and that is, of course, the 1920s and Old Hollywood. Now, we've visited Old Hollywood a few times in past episodes, but today we are going to kind of do an overview of one interesting time period during the early years of the movies. Today we are talking about the Pansy Craze, a period that lasted just a little over a decade, and just to give you the definition straight from Wikipedia, they describe the Pansy Craze as, quote, a period of increased visibility for LGBT plus culture throughout the 1920s and into the early years of the 1930s. This was a time period where not only homosexuality was popular with mainstream audiences, but drag queens, drag balls, and queer culture in general proved to be quite a hit, and for a brief time enjoyed mainstream success and somewhat acceptance before it all came crashing down following the Great Depression. And I think this is going to be a time where, you know, before Stonewall, there was a time where being queer was in chic, as the kids used to say. And it was only for a very brief period, but it does show you that, queer people have always been here, and queer culture has always been here, and people have always enjoyed it. So today we're just going to take a little walk through history and go over what exactly caused the craze, and how did the public over 100 years ago come to embrace it for such a short period of time. This will be more laid back and just a little history lesson here. I figured you guys could use a break from the last few podcasts of Pride Month. So if you're a fan of old Hollywood, queer history, movie stars, this episode is right up your alley. So let's just jump right into it. Now, of course, there's been a lot of debate over the years about how and why the craze got started, but most agree that it all started when drag, and specifically drag balls, began to take over the nightlife scene in major cities all over the country, like LA, Chicago, and New York. From here, the acts and talents proved to be so popular that it bled over into the big screen, and pretty soon was being seen by not just a room full of people, but millions of people all over the world, ushering in a new age for queer people. But before we get too far into that, let's figure out how we got here. So we know that it really all stems from drag and drag culture, specifically balls, which we've actually talked about a lot on here. I think most people know what a ball is, but actually, if you wouldn't mind giving your best definition, Brad, I'm sure we'd love to hear it.
So a ball is where queer individuals, especially like in New York at the time, was mostly people of color, and this was a place for them to come and like kind of shine where they couldn't in most of their life. And they would come and put on these extravagant balls, and they would have like different categories that they would go up against. And it was just like it was like a huge show that they put on. And it gave them like the fame and the recognition just inside their like group that they could never really obtain outside of that. And so it was really popular. It was like it built like this community. They come together, they supported each other, and it was like they had fun with it. And from a lot of that, there became like all kinds of vernacular that they used, and we still hear that today. If you listen to RuPaul or if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, a lot of the language that they use on there stems from stuff that come from the balls.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest takeaway is it was a splinter of queer culture that was mainly minority groups, queer people of color, trans people of color, and that honestly really stemmed from in the 1800s is when this really got started. Even back then, the underground queer cultures were pretty racist. And so you had the even more minority, the queer people of color, had to find their own ways to gather and celebrate their queerness, and through that, they created the balls. Now, drag balls date all the way back, as far as we know, to having begun in New York City, with the first documented ball taking place in 1865. For the longest time, these balls were largely separate from the underground queer scene at the time, but they proved popular nonetheless, and often featured male presenting performers dressing in women's clothing and doing various routines. As the ball scene grew in popularity throughout the later years of the 1800s, they saw more and more people from all walks of life catch wind of the kind of show, quote, you couldn't see anywhere else, and that proved to be a hit with the masses at large. By the turn of the century, more and more spaces, primarily bars, began opening up in major cities all over the country that were tolerant and even catered to queer people. Of course, primarily in New York, but also mainly in Chicago. Of course, the Prohibition was a huge reason, as this meant bars were now operating in secret, and it wasn't now just the gay bars. Pretty soon, more and more bars began to accept queer patrons because, all money is good money, especially when you're desperate for it. But this was also around the time of the Harlem Renaissance, which saw the area of New York see a huge boom in popularity amongst well-regarded writers, poets, musicians throughout the 1910s and early 1920s. Now, as we talked about before, many iconic areas of major cities all over the country, like the French Quarter, Harlem, and Greenwich Village, were allowed to grow into what they were now, these massive hubs for queer people, due to the areas back then being deemed, quote, undesirable. The buildings were allowed to rot, the rent was dirt cheap, and this caused many people, mainly queer people of color, to swoop in and take advantage of it and turn it into what these places are known for today. And that's, one thing you have to do is you have why the French Quarter is so popular and Greenwich Village is queer people, because back then those areas were seen as the worst part of the city. Now, following the end of World War I, queer people from all over the world began flocking to major cities after hearing stories of a more tolerant place to live for gays. This eventually led to thousands migrating to the major cities all over a very small window of time, and was something the mainstream even took notice of. In 1920, Variety even reported that pretty soon the city would be taken over by, quote, pansies, which was code word for homosexuals. With more queer people in the area, more and more gay bars began popping up, and more drag balls began to occur, which soon drew the attention of the general public, who was mainly sick of the same tired nightlife routines they had become accustomed to. And around the world, similar movements were happening in London, Paris, and Berlin, as all gave rise to an unprecedented amount of queer people coming together in one space and putting on a show that the mainstream audience seemed to eat every time. And it was one of the things, and we talked about it before, but really after World War I, so weird how things have unintended consequences. We have the queer culture we have today thanks to World War I and World War II, because during that period, you couldn't be in the army if you were gay, and so they would give you blue discharges and just drop you off at the nearest port city, which was usually New York or San Francisco. And you really, for the first time, brought all these men, mainly men, together, and they started realizing, oh, there are other queer people, there are other gay men out there. It's not just me. And on top of that, you had people that came back from the war and they were like, I fought for my country and almost died. I feel like I should be able to go and hold hands with a man if I want. And so you really saw people were more emboldened. They were more willing to fight back and push back against the laws at the time. And this really started to allow a culture to blossom.
Another thing I think the war showed people was there are real atrocities out there. There are real things to worry and that are horrible. And it's not queer people. They're way down on the totem pole. Even if you hate them, there's a lot worse stuff out there. So let's just kind of chill for a little bit. We've seen so much atrocity. Everybody chill, back up,
And yeah, that's pretty much what it boils down to. It boils down to daddy chill. If a man wants to kiss a man, that is not the worst thing happening in the world right now.
Especially if he just come back from war.
Literally put his life on the line to fight for me. Most people are like, yeah, if he wants to kiss a man, go for it. And that really does all tie back to the end of the Great War and the beginning of the Roaring '20s. Because, by that point, World War I was the bloodiest, most devastating battle up to that point. And after that, the world began to see a shift away from traditional values as more and more young people desired new ways to express themselves and to do away with tired traditions and move more into a liberating and loose lifestyle, which is like what Brad was saying. You had all these young people that came back from the war and the ones who didn't heard about what was happening, and they were like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy life. I just want to be free and do what I want. And I want everyone else to be like that too.
And I'm sure when thousands and thousands of men come together, you are going to be exposed to gay people. Because there were gay people in that army and all of the armies all across the world coming together. Again, what I think is the more people are around gay people, they're like, you know what? They're all right. They're just like us. This guy's here. He's obviously gay, but he's fighting the war with the rest of us. He's just the same as the rest of us.
And that's something too. Like I want to see the best in people. So a lot of times I'm like, I feel like it's coming from a place of ignorance, not actual hatred. And, I know a few people in my family that went to war and stuff, and they're even like that too. They're like, yeah, I was very gay people are going to hell. They're all this. But then, there are gay people I was bunkmates with and fought beside. And they were like, when you're in that situation, it doesn't matter if they're black, white, gay. You are all brothers in arms just trying to fight and make it back home.
Survive.
And so it really puts into perspective,
what's important in life.
Yeah. If he wants to marry a man or be with a man, that's fine. Like, he literally is watching my back. I'm watching his. We're just keeping each other alive. That's all that matters. And so it does put into perspective for a lot of people, yeah, it's not that big of a deal.
It's not a big deal. It has absolutely nothing to do with me, for one.
Yeah, it's none of my business what they do. And of course, with the Roaring '20s, it gave rise to flapper culture, jazz music, and a more public eye on queer culture. As the younger generation began to indulge in more, quote, liberal customs, this is when we truly saw drag balls take off. And by the 1920s, they were some of the most popular events to attend at every major city around the country as the audience became more straight-oriented than queer. This opened people's minds to not only men dressing in women's clothing and drag queens, but also trans people who made up the majority of the shows. This helped normalize the sight of a man dressed as a woman to the general public, and pretty soon mainstream clubs and businessmen began to take notice of the balls and saw them as their next big moneymaker. The Pansy Craze is believed to have initially started in Chicago as mainstream club owners began to hire drag queens to perform for the first time outside of the ball scene. This included in front of audiences made up largely of straight men, and these acts consisted of sharp-tongued drag queens performing, offering witty banter to the audience, and displaying overly flamboyant mannerisms and personalities, something mainstream audiences had yet to see up to that point. This helped show audience members how the line between femininity and masculinity could be blurred, and it didn't have to be a straight line. And so it was a slow progress. The craze was a slow progress because it started with the ball scene, and then when they realized that was making money, they were like, you can just come to this quote unquote regular club and perform. And it really just helped people be desensitized to it. Like, yeah, some men dress like women. That's fine. They're funny to watch. They perform, like they put on a good show. Like, it's great. Pretty soon, these performers that crossed over into the mainstream began to become more celebrities themselves for something that in the past would have gotten them arrested under anti-sodomy laws. 3 in particular are acknowledged by historians as helping usher in the official Pansy Craze, and those are performers Carl Norman, Ray Bourbon, and Gene Mallon. All 3 rose to prominence performing as female impersonators in various nightclubs before breaking into the mainstream. In particular, Gene Mallon would skyrocket to fame as he went from performing in clubs to headlining major motion pictures in Hollywood, all while dressed in drag. Gene was born Victor Mallon in 1908 and initially found work as a chorus boy before rising through the ranks of the club scene before being discovered and performing on Broadway. After that, making his way to the movies. Now, Gene appeared in various movies dressed in drag, most notably an appearance in the 1933 movie Arizona to Broadway, where his character dresses as Mae West and sings to the main cast. His performances were talked about in Variety and the New York Times, as many recounted tales of his late-night escapades performing at gay bars and beating up hecklers who called him slurs in the street. Which, perfect. And Gene was described as being very sharp-tongued, quick-witted, with one fan of his stating he knew exactly how to cut them to shreds using only his words. Pretty soon the term pansy, a term originally used as an insult towards homosexuals, was embraced by the community, and it was used as a badge of honor, as many of these mainstream performers began to refer to themselves as pansy performers, and the venues that hosted them as pansy clubs. And, we see that a lot too. When someone uses a word to hurt you, you take it back, and then they can't hurt you with it anymore. Like, you call me a pansy, I call myself a pansy every day, so you're not doing anything. Pretty soon, it got so popular. Hollywood, of course, came knocking on the door, and they began to include more and more visible references to queer people, including several high-profile productions, including the 1927 film Wings, the first mainstream movie to feature a shot of a lesbian couple, and show an on-screen kiss between 2 men. The film would go on to win the very first ever Academy Award for Best Picture. Prior to the introduction of the Hays Code in 1934, films were allowed to get away with actually quite a lot, including showing nudity, violence, and of course, homosexuality on screen. And it's really weird to show. If you go back, I think we all have this misconception, movies before 1970 are very washed, very clean is the best word I guess you can use. But if you go back to the 20s movies, those movies had nudity, violence, language, all this stuff. And it's so weird to see the dichotomy between it. You feel like the further you go in the future, the more progressive you get. And so it's always fascinating to see how you were really progressive and then you got really conservative and then progressive again.
And here we go again.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to tell this story, because it kind of is history repeating itself currently in some ways, where you have a lot of people trying to erase queer culture from the mainstream, and it's at a point where, it is in the public eye, and so there's this pushback, and it's just it's always best to remember where we came from. So this is not the first time this is happening. Now, one of my favorite examples is from a film called The Public Enemy from 1934, when the lead character, who is a violent mobster, is flirted with by a male tailor and asked out on a date, and instead of getting angry or offended, the lead just politely declines and moves on with his day, as if that is a completely normal, everyday thing, which it is, but back then it most certainly was not. And so it really just shows you, there were moments where, yeah, they treated this as normal. Oh yeah, I got asked out on a date by a guy. I'm not gay, but thank you, and move on. And so this really just coincided with the popularity of queer nightlife performers, and it seemed Hollywood was at least attempting to present homosexuality in a more casual light compared to what was soon to come. Meanwhile, the demand for more and more drag shows and balls only continued to grow and really culminated on Halloween night 1932, when the largest drag ball the world had ever seen up to that point was held in Chicago at the Coliseum. The event was covered by every major newspaper in the area and even attended by renowned sociology professor Ernest Burgess, who took a class of over 100 students to the event and tasked them with interviewing anybody they could to get a better understanding of homosexuality. The professor was in awe of the beautiful women who danced and floated around the arena with such grace, and then went to the men's room and hiked up their dresses to use the urinal. It really, like I said, they'd never seen this before. So they were like, that's crazy to me, but fascinating. So the sociology behind drag balls and drag culture fascinated him to the point he actually began to document Chicago's queer scene. And it's thanks to him we even know much of anything about what went on in the city, and honestly everywhere all over the country for that matter, because it would be attempted to be erased as we moved into the McCarthy era of the 1950s. Now, this drag ball of 1932 was attended by over 10,000 people and proved that queer culture had a place in mainstream society. One historian would later remark how amazing it was that not only was newspapers commenting on and reporting on the quote pansies, but that they made them visible, not in a harmful way, but in a way that just showed mainstream audiences, hey, we're here. This also extended to how queer performers were treated by police, because although there were still shutdowns, crackdowns, and arrests from time to time, drag queens saw an unprecedented amount of freedom as they were now allowed to walk the streets, perform at major show venues, and be openly queer without getting arrested. When looking back on this small era of unseen queer independence, historians believe it happened due to a perfect storm of circumstances, as the beginning of the Roaring Twenties saw more people being open-minded to things they may not have been before the war, and the start of the Prohibition, which meant that the now heteronormative society and queer society were kind of forced together underground to enjoy clubs, bars, alcohol, and that meant both sides were exposed to the other one, and it kind of, like I said, it normalized it for them, it kind of brought them together, and it allowed for a more relaxed viewpoint of homosexuality. Music also played a huge factor in the popularity of the craze, as many artists would perform their own songs or reworkings of already popular songs, often adding in innuendos and subtle nods at their sexuality. The music was described as being clever, witty, and not too in your face, with just the right amount of subtlety. And it wasn't just the homosexuals that were getting in on the action either. One of the most iconic, recognizable, and beloved stars of the time, a little-known actress named Mae West. You may have heard of her. If you don't know who Mae West is, you know Alaska doing Mae West in Drag Race All-Stars 2. She's like, oh, one of my favorite actresses. Amazing. Hilarious. And Brad here and our other buddy had to listen to mine and our friend Emily's impression of Mae West for a whole week once when we went to DC. But it just really shows you how much of an icon she really is, because it can't be stated enough. Although not queer herself, Mae West was a staunch supporter of gay rights throughout her whole career. She even wrote a play that premiered on Broadway called The Drag, that opened in 1927 and depicted drag queens and homosexuals. Inspired to write it after seeing the struggles her gay friends were going through during this time, Mae wanted to open the eyes of the general public and show them what queer people actually had to go through. Despite being threatened with arrest if she went through with it, Mae happily allowed herself to be arrested and spent several days in jail. She also released several hit songs, such as A Guy Who Takes His Time and I'm No Angel, both of which celebrate people and their different sexualities. Mae also made it a point to go out of her way to cast openly gay actors in all her plays and movies, despite protests from the studio, and she proved to be one of the leading pioneers in mainstream culture who unapologetically fought for equal rights for queer people, despite what it could do to her career. Which just shows you what an icon she is.
And why don't you go ahead and give them everyone's favorite Mae West impression that you and Emily come up with?
Oh, yeah, so when we were on the DC trip, Brad has a handlebar. I don't even remember how it came, but
I remember we actually went to a pop culture museum in Washington, D.C., and they had one of Mae West's dresses there, and so this came from that.
The one I'm thinking of is the one, let me see if I can do it. Now I'm feeling pressure. Come here, Mr. Handlebar. I know how to ride a bike. That one?
That one.
Yeah.
That got it started. Even our buddy Chad thought that one was really funny. And then the rest of the week was, to everything.
Oh, come here, Mr. Handlebar. I know how to ride a bike. That was really funny. So, yeah, Mae West was a huge reason also because she was not a member of the queer community. So she was really able to add some, I don't know the word to use, just some back validity to it.
Allyship.
And that just shows you how important allyship is. Pride Month isn't just for the homos and the queers, it is also for our allies. We love you. So for a time, there seemed to be no end in sight for the rise of queer culture in the mainstream as more and more newspapers, venues, and films found ways to talk about and incorporate the pansies in their stories. But of course, as we know looking back from 2025, this was a short-lived time period for acceptance as the Roaring Twenties began to draw to a close and the Great Depression soon began, throwing the entire world into chaos as people found themselves unemployed, without money, and without a way to provide for their families. Thus marked the beginning of the end for the short-lived Pansy Craze. Throughout the Prohibition, many queer-centric bars were only able to stay afloat and operate due to being owned by the mob. Of course, when you have the mob, you have violence, as various different factions began fighting for majority control, which often led to violence and even murder, as several club owners would be found executed in mob-style manners throughout the 20s. This helped perpetuate the myth that homosexuality is dangerous and that, quote, where the pansies went, bad things would soon follow. Following the start of the Great Depression in 1929, many people, like they usually do during a major time of crisis, looked for a scapegoat to blame for this tragedy, and one of the most pointed to groups as having caused this was the pansies. Along with the flappers and other more liberal cultures to appear out of the 20s, they were now seen as being the reason behind, quote, the moral decay of the country that led to the stock market crash.
I would love to see how the moral decay led to a stock market crash. Sometimes people are just...
It's one of those things, someone always has to have a group to blame because no one wants to be like, well, maybe it was just us. It's like, no, we didn't do anything wrong. It was those deplorable homosexuals or World War II. After Germany lost World War I, they were like, it wasn't our fault. It was the Jews' fault. And it's always just someone has to be the scapegoat for everything wrong because no one can take accountability. The end of the craze ended not with a bang, but with a gradual decline as the front page headlines talking about the next big drag ball or performance were now replaced with depressing news about the state of the economy, and with no mainstream spotlight on the community anymore, local officials over the country began to act on cracking down on the newfound freedoms the pansies had. This included the mayors of New York and Chicago demanding police presence be stationed outside of every bar known to cater or have performers that were pansies. If any were caught, they were to be arrested for public indecency, and this actually included performer Ray Bourbon, who was arrested in 1931. Soon, gay bars that had once been allowed to operate out in the open were also forced to shut down, and things only got worse following the end of the Prohibition in 1933. Which now allowed alcohol to be served in the open again, and straight people no longer had to go underground for it. This created a divide between the heteronormative community and the queer community, as the two no longer needed each other to survive. This caused the once popular balls to slowly decline in popularity with mainstream audiences, as newspapers were no longer commenting on them, and straight people were no longer coming to those types of venues. This was followed the next year with the introduction of the Hays Code in the Hollywood system that offered a very strict and very conservative list of guidelines films must follow in order for a film to be released to the public. This was done as the Great Depression saw the general public moving closer back to more conservative family values. One of the biggest rules films could no longer do was, quote, depict sexual perversion, aka show any form of homosexuality on screen. As the years passed, this rule was loosened and films could depict subtle homosexual characters, but only if they were a sadist, a predator, or a murderer, and they had to die at the end of the movie. reinforcing negative stereotypes about queer people that still persist to this day. Now, the final nail in the coffin of the Pansy Craze, many people agree, was the tragic death of Gene Mallon in 1933. On August 10th of that year, Gene was leaving a performance in LA when he climbed into his car with his partner and several friends. Gene accidentally put the car into reverse instead of drive and ended up reversing over a pier and into the water. Although the passengers were able to escape, Gene tragically passed away, and with that, the death of the Pansy Craze's biggest star. Many saw this as the official ending of the very brief period of exposure for the community, something that wouldn't happen again until Stonewall. As the world entered the late 1930s and a new threat was rising in Germany with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, people began to turn more to traditional family values, and pretty soon the brief period of freedom queer people had was nothing but a fleeting memory, as World War II would commence, and soon after, the McCarthy era would begin in the 1950s and usher in one of the worst persecutions for queer people in American history. Over the following decades, the Pansy Craze was somewhat of a distant memory, but has recently begun to find new life. This brief period of time serves as a reminder of the resilience of the community and how, even in a time where it wasn't acceptable, they were able to carve out a space for themselves in the mainstream and shout to the world, "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." The impact of these brave performers is still felt today as modern day queer artists continue to draw inspiration from them and their work, and it just goes to show you that no matter how hard people may try to bury us and our history, we will never go away and will continue to be here and be proud. And that was the Pansy Craze of the 1920s and 30s. And I think it really does, it's kind of parallel to kind of what's happening right now with all the queer erasure in media, especially in America currently. And so it just shows you that it may seem scary now, but as we have for over 100 years, case in point, queer people will endure and we will survive and get through this.
I think, too, now we have the internet that right now they don't have as much control over. So, back then, the government could really control everything you watched, what you watched on TV, what you saw at the movies. And so far, the internet's kind of been, it's not the wild, wild west it once was, but it is still a place where you can go and be like, I want to be exposed to other things than just what someone above me deems appropriate. And so I think it's harder to erase completely. Believe me, they'll give it their best shot.
Yeah, they're definitely going to give it their best shot. And I think that's something we have that they didn't have back in the 1930s is the internet. It's a great place to stay connected, informed, and just to stay in touch with this large network of people just like you.
I mean, every time that you type out something online and you put the T back into LGBTQ, you are going against the grain at this moment.
Yeah, you are. And that's in and of itself is a form of activism. And, any form of activism is good activism. Not everyone could be big, and that's fine. Do it in your own way. And part of that is just making sure that they don't get away with erasing any form of queer visibility, which is also kind of what we're trying to do with the podcast.
And when they do try to erase it, you can be vocal about it. At least be vocal about it.
You can, and I love to see, especially recent years, like people are a lot more vocal about not putting up with any BS when it comes to you trying to take people's literal rights away in 2025.
They're still doing a good job of doing that, though. They are still doing a good job of taking people's rights away.
They are, but don't let that discourage you from fighting the good fight, because it is.
That's all we've got. You got to keep fighting.
Just got to keep fighting. And I think that's a great way to close out Pride Month. Keep fighting.
One of these days, you might be listening to us on some kind of shortwave radio, on some kind of pirate station, but we'll be here.
I'm going to stay optimistic, and instead you're going to hear us on mainstream radio one day, because it's going to be that successful. It's going to be that open for queer people to just, be everywhere and not have to worry about, your rights being taken away. I have hope. You guys have hope.
I have hope too.
I think with that, you guys, Thank you so much for tuning in to the final episode of Pride Month. I'm so sad it's ending. It's been such a fun month. We still, even we're recording this ahead of time, we still have Nashville to look forward to.
And I do still have one more Patreon episode to put out there to make a total of 6 episodes this month for you guys.
So if you guys aren't already Patreon members, you can go there and you can listen to several new episodes. And just thank you guys so much for another awesome Pride Month. It's been amazing. It's been fun. It's been so memorable. And we can't do it without you guys. So thank you so much for continuing to support and listen to the podcast.
And thank you for all the people that we met this weekend at Pride. Literally made my day. So if you ever think that you're going to come up and bother us if we're out and you're like, hey, I'm a podcast listener, you would be wrong because we want to hear from you.
Oh, yeah, that completely slipped my mind. One of the people that came up to us and said they were a big fan of the podcast. They listened to the podcast. He came up and I was like, you seem really familiar. And then so he followed us on our Instagram and I clicked on it and I was like, that's why you seem so familiar. You were my teacher in high school. My, what a small world. And it was really good to see him again. He was an awesome teacher. I loved him. But that was so crazy. I was like, that is such a small world.
And he has really good fashion style. I really liked his glasses.
He does. I vividly remember that from high school. I always wore a bow tie. But it was good seeing you again. Good seeing all of you. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. If you enjoyed this episode in the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. Helps us out a lot. Helps other people discover the podcast. And of course, we just love hearing from you guys. If you want to see photos from today's case, you can follow us on Instagram at Beers with Queers Pod, that's POD, or on Facebook at Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. You can also rate my Mae West impression on our Instagram if you want.
Or give us your own.
Or yeah, send in your own. I want to hear people's Mae West impressions because I love doing them. I may be horrible at them, but it's fun.
Do them, tag Beers with Queers, and we'll put them in our stories.
100%. So stay safe, stay dangerous out there, y'all, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride.